Hey friends, welcome to the Raising Boys and Girls podcast. I'm Sissy Goff.
And I'm David Thomas.
And I'm Melissa Trevathan.
And we're so glad you joined us for this conversation. Let's dive in. Esau McCaulley is the Jonathan Blanchard Associate Professor of New Testament and Public Theology at Wheaton College. He is the author of numerous books, including How Far to the Promised Land, One Black Family Story of Hope and Survival in the American South, Reading While Black, and the children's book Josie Johnson's Hair, and the Holy Spirit, and Andy Johnson and the March for Justice. A contributing opinion writer for the New York Times, his writings have also appeared in The Atlantic, The Washington Post, and Christianity Today. You will love this thoughtful conversation with Esau McCaulley.
And you all, my very favorite part of the conversation was the very end. So hang in there, listen all the way through because you're going to want to write this down.
We are so excited to have you on this podcast. We have long admired and respected your work, and we were just sharing together before we hit record that we were all speaking together in Denver at an event and didn't get to cross paths in that time. And we were so disappointed, but thrilled we're getting to make up for some lost time being with you today. And for folks who aren't familiar with your work, would you just start out by talking a little bit about what you do and how you found your way to the work you do?
Oh, man. My kids say that it takes too long to explain to their friends what I do, so I'll try to be brief. I am an associate professor of New Testament at Wheaton College. I'm a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times. I'm a pastor of a church plant called All Saints Anglican Church in Naperville, and I write books. And I have a podcast. Did I say podcast already?
No.
So those are the things that the Esau McCaulley podcast. So that's a little bit of a mediumist answer. I think that you had asked me about my writing, and how did I get into writing is I kind of stumbled into it. So if you want to tell you more, it's more, I was writing things over on the side. I had a personal blog. And then at some point, someone said, hey, would you write for our group blog? This is back in the blogging days. And so then I did a group blog. And then at one point, I got connected to Christianity Today. But then after that, the Washington Post reached out to me and said, would you write a couple of things for us? And then after that, the New York Times reached out to me and said, would you write some stuff for us? And then that became kind of my writer columnist side. As far as the books that I write, I didn't know that people paid you to write books. I just wrote all of the time as a kid and growing up. And then I wrote a book called Reading While Black about 4 or 5 years ago that people seemed to connect with. And then that gave me more opportunities to write. And until people stopped buying the books, I get to keep writing them. And so I also, maybe this is a rambling story, but even though I'm a New Testament scholar, I found myself interested in a lot of things outside of New Testament scholarship. And I realized a lot of the rules, that's the kinds of things that academics could write, I didn't have to follow. And so I've just started since then to write in just about every genre imaginable, depending on what interests me.
Esau, that's amazing. I don't understand really how you have time to sleep. All the things you're doing, it's remarkable.
Yes, it is.
I don't miss any sporting events. So as long as I'm at the kids' soccer game, and their parent-teacher conferences, I stay out of trouble. And so
that's great.
How old are your kids?
I have a 16-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 10-year-old, and an 8-year-old. And I kind of think about it. Having a third grader and a junior in high school, that's a lot. I mean, those are two radically different points of life. And I feel, and I love all of my kids. I don't want to be, but I feel like you should get more because every kid's going to graduate in like a year and a half. But, he's going to graduate and I'll have like an elementary school. The horizon of having kids in my house is just so long. I feel like you should get some kind of medal, kind of award each time a kid graduates, not just more kids coming through the system.
Yes, you should get the diploma. Yeah.
Something, right? Something. I just get more debt because then I got to pay for them to go to college.
That's right.
That is awesome. Well, we're sending you some books about those kids.
Oh,
soon.
thank you.
So,
thank you.
Yes. We're so excited about your new book, How Far to the Promised Land. And we would love to hear you talk about the story that inspired that and what it's been like to tell that story in the world.
Yeah, well, there's two things that's probably you need to understand. It's like my own kind of intellectual space where I was in And then maybe I'll tell you a little bit about like the actual narrative itself. So coming out of, I wrote this book called Reading While Black that I mentioned earlier. And it's kind of this idea that, there's the relevance of Christian faith to the experiences of African Americans and why African Americans have maintained faith in places where it's been difficult. And so when you write a book trying to say to people you should stay Christian or Christianity is important, there can be this perception that you are a person of faith because you have all of these things worked out. That because your life just was kind of easy and you're one of those people for whom God works, right? And even when you're an intellectual, when you're seen as an intellectual, you can see it only as a brain and not an actual life. And so there was a part of me that wanted to say to people, hey, this has been complicated to me too. That it wasn't just in these intellectual questions that I had growing up as a kid that's kind of reflected some in my more academic work. There were actually real traumatic things that I had to walk through as a real human being. And so I was more interested in general in writing a more personal story to kind of expose that part of me. And so now that's the context, right? And so what happened, the story itself, though, it actually begins about, 5 to 7 years ago. My father died. Well, when I started writing the book, it was 5 to 7 years ago. My father died in 2017, and he was a truck driver, and it was a single car accident. He was driving his truck back from California towards the South. And we don't know what happens. He just veers off one overpass down to the other and he dies on impact. And my family quickly decides they wanted me, the clergy person in the family, to do the eulogy, to do the funeral itself. And that was complicated because me and my dad didn't have much of a relationship growing up because he struggled with addiction and drugs. Mm-hmm. And so I found myself having to think through doing a eulogy for someone who I didn't know, whose absence had played a significant part of my life. Mm-hmm. Wow. And so as a clergy person, whenever you do a funeral, you often sit down with the friends and family to learn something about this person's life. And so I had to sit down with my mom and my aunts and uncles and the people who knew him to learn a little bit about his life. But this is not just a normal eulogy.
Right.
This is my life. And so there was a lot of emotional connection because what began as an attempt to make sense of my father quickly became this opportunity to make sense of his impact on me and to understand more about my family. And so the more I dug into that story, it really became a family history over 3 generations. Because I didn't know my father, I was not connected to his family stories very often. And so what began as a desire to get to know my father ended up becoming this exploration of a Black family over about 100 years in the South. Maybe this is a PhD person in me because I'm a researcher, right? And so I ended up going all the way back to my great grandmother, who was a Jim Crow, who was a tenant farmer under Jim Crow, and understanding the things that she experienced. And it really became the story of a Black family in America trying to make their way in the decisions and the mistakes and the failures and the traumas and the triumphs that comes from it. And because a lot of my family was religious, a lot of clergy through my family line, it was a sense of trying to make sense of where God might be in the midst of all of this suffering. Mm. And so the book, How Far to the Promised Land, that emerges from all of this research, is bookended by the eulogy. It opens with, my father's death. And then the final chapter in the book, it's the actual, this is crazy because I can't believe they paid me to do this. It's the actual eulogy that I wrote for my father's funeral. The book closes with those actual words that were spoken over his body in the church that I grew up in. And so it's that's the framing narrative, but a lot of the stuff in between it are these scenes from different points from the 1920s through my childhood, in the 80s and 90s. It's not chronological. It's more these episodic moments that I think reveal something about me and my family in America, and hopefully a little bit about what God might be up to in the midst of it. So that's How Far to the Promised Land.
Wow, I cannot wait to read it. And when are they going to approach you with movie rights? Because that should certainly be a film. That would be incredible.
Well, yes.
Well, if you know Denzel or Viola Davis, Denzel Washington and Viola Davis, I want Denzel to play my dad.
Yeah.
I want Viola to play my mom.
Yeah.
I don't know who's. I cannot imagine someone who would play me. But yeah, I'm starting to cast it. I'm working with some people, right? I don't know. Yeah. I'll find a role for y'all too. If y'all have any acting chops.
We'd love it.
Yeah. Okay, then.
Count
Y'all
us
remind me.
in. Well, in the description, you say, what does each person struggle to build a life teach us about what we owe each other, about what it means to be human? And we love those questions and are curious, how would you answer them yourself?
Yeah. So, I guess what I was trying to get at in this story is when you grew up in that context that I grew up in, and you grew up in poverty, and sometimes the lesson that you learn, the people who people pay attention to are the people who escape. And so they kind of say, well, look at, Esau. He grew up without a dad. He grew up in this kind of rough part of town. He worked hard, and then he kind of made it through to, middle class. That's the American dream, right? And so we think that particular life, that particular narrative is instructive because we know how the story ends. We can cheer for the protagonist. We can say, oh, it's really sad that he's going through these things, but I know he or she's going to be okay. But the problem is I actually grew up in those communities, and I realized I'm not the only important story that actually matters there. And that sometimes people can follow all the rules, do everything that they're supposed to do, and things don't always end well. I told a story, an example of this is in the book. I talk about my great-grandmother, Sophia, who worked, like I said, she worked as a tenant farmer. And she was illiterate because they didn't teach people to read, in the early 1900s for young Black women. They didn't teach you to read. And she was a midwife, when she wasn't picking cotton. And she cleaned homes. And she used all of that money to save up like you're supposed to do in the United States and buy a plot of land. You can imagine a literate Black woman in the 1920s buying their own plot of land. It's almost unimaginable. And one of the things that happens in that land gets passed down to my grandmother, which is like it's supposed to be, that generational wealth. This is how it's supposed to work. You work hard, you start somewhere, even though you're illiterate, anyone can make it in America. But what occurs is there's a fire in my family's in the house where they kind of grew up, and that's kind of an important part of the story. There's a fire where they grew up, and the house is burned down. And so she has to sign this contract to get a small loan to pay for the repairs. But because she's illiterate, and it's a white family, and they manipulate her, and those loan payments, you got to imagine what it would cost to repair a home in this fire takes place in the 1950s. And she pays monthly, my grandmother, all the way through to her death in the 90s. It's like 40 or 50 years for the repairs on a house. And when she dies, that land reverts back to the people who gave the mortgage. And so effectively, my family was treated out of their family land because she was illiterate when the contract was signed, and we were never able to intervene. No one ever saw the contract. There are no receipts. She would just walk up there with an envelope of cash, and did this through the 70s, through the 80s, and through the 90s. Wow. And there is no, we don't know what the number was, but there is no number that it relates to the repairs on a single house that's 40 years of payments. That then all of the land, not just all of the land, reverts back to the people who originally owned it. Mm-hmm. And so, what does that story tell you, right? Does it say something that like, oh, my grandmother shouldn't have been born in Jim Crow, or great grandmother shouldn't have been born in Jim Crow. She should have learned how to read, so that or you can say, there was nothing wrong with what she did. There's something wrong with a country that does these things to her. Yes. And that story, right? And here's the important part about it. That was my grandmother. I spent my first 4 or 5 years of my life living on that land before it was taken from us. Mm. And so I am who I am in part because of her. Until my story isn't the only story that we need to know about, it's her story. And I could kind of multiply. Well, the stories are multiplied in the book. But what I wanted to be able to say is that what do you do then when people say to you, tell me your story? Tell me your story, my story. But my story doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to my great-grandmother. It belongs to my grandmother. It belongs to the people in my neighborhood. And those narratives, all of those things that happened in my community shape who I am. And so you can't understand me apart from them. And so I thought to myself, if I have a platform, if I have the opportunity to write a book and tell a story, it is not going to be the hero's journey of a single protagonist. It's actually going to be the story of the community.
Mm. And now a quick break to hear from one of our awesome sponsors so that we can bring you all this great content.
David, we spoke this weekend in Alabama, and I met 3 sets of parents on their 4th child. I can't count how many parents come up to us at events that are pregnant with their 3rd or 4th child. They are heroic for wanting to learn and grow. I wish we could give them free babysitting, a spa day, and a nap.
But what we can do is tell them about our sponsor, Needed, and help them find more energy, mental clarity, and resilience through products we've come to know and love from our friends at Needed.
Needed is a brand we trust for nutrition products that support all stages of parenthood, from preconception to postpartum support and beyond. They're backed by over 4,000 nutrition and health experts, including OBGYNs, midwives, and dietitians, and the brand really understands the unique needs of parents.
A Needed survey found 90% of breastfeeding women expressed difficulty concentrating, 87% said they felt forgetful, and 83% expressed difficulty with mental clarity like brain fog. And I bet 100% of them need a nap, bless their hearts.
The mental load on women is heavy, from stress to caregiving, multitasking, technology use, and the unique demands of everyday life. I am loving taking Needed's cognitive and stress support. I've noticed better focus, attention, mental clarity, concentration, better ability to cope with stress, and better energy. And we want that for you too.
And they even have products specifically designed for dads too. I love their men's multi. It supports everything from libido and sperm health to brain function and hair coverage.
If you're looking for products that can optimally support your brain health, mood, energy, mental clarity, and replenish your nutrient stores after having 1 or more kids, check out Needed's comprehensive line of nutritional products. Head over to thisisneeded.com and use code RBG for 20% off your first order.
That's THISISNEEDED.com and use code RBG for 20% off your first order.
David, I have a question for you. What difference has Jolie made for your skin, hair, and well-being?
I put Jolie's filtered shower head on weeks ago and love it. It's best in class for removing chlorine and heavy metals. It's the only lab-tested and clinically trialed filtering shower head on the market. Clinically proven to reduce hair shedding in 81% of people. Lab-tested to reduce hair frizziness by 40%. Lab-tested to maintain color retention, lab-tested to protect the hair surface layer. I was singing in the shower this morning, Jolie, 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 please don't let him take my hair, Jolie.
Well, your wish is coming true. I love that we wove Dolly Parton into this ad. Now, we all know how important it is to filter the water we drink, but why don't we think the same way about the water we shower in?
And Jolie still gives strong water pressure and fits all showers as the plumbing pipe size is universal. That was very important to me. I will always love strong water pressure.
Bringing Dolly back in.
Jolie will give you your best skin and hair guaranteed. Head to jolieskinco.com/RBG to try it out for yourself with free shipping.
And if you don't like it, you can return your Jolie for a full refund within 60 days, no questions asked.
And now back to the show.
Well, you have so many books we could spend time talking about. Another one that we loved and we're super excited about is your book for kids, Andy Johnson and the March for Justice. Yes. Will you talk to us about Andy and why you decided to write a kid's book on this topic?
Okay, so I have small kids, and it was actually back in 2020 when there were some protests going on here in Chicago around issues of racial injustice. And we were deciding whether or not we were going to take our kids. And we ended up not taking our kids to the city. We're about 45 minutes outside of the city. But there was an event that we did take our kids to that was local to where we live here in Wheaton. And I began to think to myself, there aren't a lot of resources to help kids understand complicated issues like injustice and how they might be able to process these things in ways that are healthy. And this is just in my context, I realized there's these two kinds of buckets that I often, as a parent who consume content, that I found for my kids. There's religious content. that, will teach you about faith and God, and those things are good. And I think we buy those things for our kids. And then there's like these culture positivity books about, race and history and all of those things. But they tend to be in two separate buckets. Mm. And so I said, well, actually, for my kids and for me, both of these things are integrated and not separated. Like, how do we think about how our faith and the things that we believe about God helps us think about the things that we see that are wrong in the world? And we're kidding ourselves if we think that kids are kind of completely unaware of when bad things happen. They talk about it in school, they hear about it in class, they kind of pick up on elements of it. And so I didn't want to write a book that was just like this dour book that the world is broken and blah, 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 blah. I wanted to be able to tell a story of a family that shares deep religious convictions and they uses those religious convictions to do good in the world, but also to explain the history of how those things have happened in the past, particularly the African-American church and the civil rights movement. Now I had to do that in a way that wasn't as that was age appropriate. And so like the March for Justice is just like it's a vague enough term so the kids don't have to get caught up in what might be some uncomfortable story. So it's not about here's an incident that happens and here's how, it's more of a, when people see something wrong in the world, have Christians historically responded? And as it relates to, I'm influenced a lot by the nonviolent philosophy of Martin Luther King, who believes that love and nonviolence is the way to transform society. And so that means that you do things like peaceful protest. And so we wanted to show the kids, I want to show my kids and hopefully other kids, what does it look like to see something wrong in society and respond to it in ways that are productive versus counterproductive. Mm. And productive for Christians has historically meaning engaging in forms of nonviolent protest when we speak on behalf of the people who can't speak for themselves. Now, that's the super sophisticated way. I got to tell you the secondary move, which is no one's going to care about but me, but it's to keep peace in my house. So I wrote a book a few years ago, a children's book called Josie Johnson's Hair and the Holy Spirit.
Will you say the title again? It's so good.
Josie Johnson's Hair and the Holy Spirit. And that was when a publisher had come to me and said, Esau, are you interested in writing a kids book? And I sat down and thought about it and said, I think I do have a pretty cool story to tell. And because I used to take my daughter to get her hair done. And so I told the story of someone taking their daughter to get their hair done. But it was rooted in my second oldest kids and what I did with them. But I don't know if you ever have any kids. Believe it or not, kids can sometimes be a little bit excited when they get something the other kids don't get. And so there was just no peace in the McCaulley family when one of the four kids had a book and the other one didn't. And so I said, okay, I got to write 3 more books. This is like, there's only one way out of this. I got to write 3 more kids books. And so so we ended up creating, and I was going to do it anyway, but this is we ended up creating the Johnson family, which is, they're in Josie Johnson, but this is the Johnson family. And each story in the Johnson family series is patterned after one of the 4 Johnson kids. So this is the second of actually 4 books that are going to come out.
We got 2 more to come.
Got 2 more coming. And I just got the artwork on one of them yesterday. And so, so there's other ones coming. And so this is the second book that deals with Andy Johnson. And all of them have similar tones. And that they're fun. I hope there's funny scenes. It's a family that loves each other. But it's also related to some place that their faith is impacting how they engage in the world. Mm-hmm. And so I really want to equip families, and maybe it's my family's the only family that has this need. I want content that's accessible, that kids would like to read, that has a interesting message without being overly preachy. Mm. And so those are the things that I'm trying to get across with. And I think that Andy Johnson and the March for Justice, I think that I had gotten better. This is my second kids book. And so in children's literature, you have such a small amount of words. You think you have 800 words. Right. And you would think that it's easier to write a long book because you can just go on and on. But when each word has to do some work. And so this is the second one. And I think that I've actually gotten better as a children's writer. And I've been able to do a better job of inhabiting or thinking what's useful for the kids. One of the ways that I tested it, could I get my kids to sit down without me having to tell them to listen to the whole thing? Or would they read it on their own? And so it's passed the McCaulley kid, Andy Johnson and the March for Justice, passed the McCaulley kid seal of approval.
That is great.
It's fantastic. And we are all benefiting from the fact that you have multiple kids and that you've got to give a book to everybody. Because
Yes.
Everybody gets a book.
We all want you to keep creating great content that we're benefiting from. And even building on what you just shared, do you have any other thoughts on the importance or the how of including kids in racial reconciliation?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of things. One is that we have to make sure that kids are kids and that everything that kids do is age appropriate. So we don't want to burden kids with the responsibilities of adults. We also want to give them proactive ways so they can feel engaged in ways that are helpful. So if you imagine one of the scenes in the book deals with like the kids go and they make little posters with their parents where they kind of write these kinds of statements. And so one of the ones like God loves justice or something like that. Mm. Now, what you're really doing there is forming the kids' imagination. So as they grow and increase in agency, that's a core value that they can then express in their actual lives. And so I don't believe that we're just I think that what you're doing with children is helping them develop principles and values to help them flourish in society and help society flourish, make them good citizens. And so I think that this, to me, is a way of beginning to form their imagination, to see that there are people in society who, I think this is an uncontroversial thing to say, who aren't always treated fairly. And what is a productive way? And I think that most kids understand it, because even in elementary school, there's kids who kind of get bullied. There are kids who are mistreated. And one of the first things you hear kids beginning to say is, that's not fair. Because they have an intuitive sense of, I have a certain worth. And when someone doesn't respect that worth, that harms me. And part of empathy, that is that same way that you don't like feeling dehumanized or feeling to be made less than, other people don't feel that same way as well. And so part of the responsibility that you have is to protect the hearts and the feelings and the needs and the rights of other people. And so that's what I want. I just want my kids to have an imagination. I don't want my kids, writing their congressman trying to get laws changed. I mean, that's not their job. It's more them just beginning to understand their potential to shape society and engaging in ways that are age appropriate.
Love that. Yes. And now we're going to take a little break to hear from one of our sponsors who makes this podcast possible. David, do you know about PFAS?
Yes, it's what I did when we stopped to get gas on the way to speak in Alabama and we were running late.
No, most of today's nonstick pans contain PFAS, also known as forever chemicals, which are under increasing global scrutiny for their impact on the environment and our health. Recognizing their impact, the EU plans to prohibit PFAS by 2025, but not our place. They have always been PFAS-free and offers the most durable, toxin-free ceramic coatings, ensuring a healthy, safe cooking experience.
Our Place is a mission-driven and female-founded brand that makes beautiful kitchen products that are healthy and sustainable.
I love them. I have them at home and at the lake house. I used the Always Pan 2.0 this morning, and I leave it out as a decorative piece.
So do we. They're beautifully designed in awesome colors that feel like art objects that elevate any home and that make you feel creative in the kitchen.
Upgrade to Our Place today and say goodbye to forever chemicals in your kitchen.
Go to FromOurPlace.com and enter our code RBG at checkout to receive 10% off site-wide. That's FromOurPlace.com, code RBG.
Our Place offers a 100-day free trial with free shipping and returns. And now back to our show. Along those lines, I mean, you've said so many great things already in terms of this, but what do you believe in this world we're living in today that kids need most from their parents?
I think that kids need to, I think that parents have play a huge role in shaping kids' sense of themselves. So it may seem to be overly simple. I want my kids to know that they are loved unconditionally, that they are loved apart from their performance.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that I tell them. And for me, I want my kids to understand that like I'm limited as a dad and that I make mistakes too. And that when I make mistakes, I try to apologize to them to understand that perfection is not required in our family. And so we try to model in the McCaulley house graciousness. Like we're grace. We practice grace. When I fail, and I say to them, Dad did this wrong. And if I did something wrong in front of the 4 or 5 kids, well, we only have 4, and my wife and the dog. Everybody has to. We regather, and I say, okay, you need to all hear me say this. So I think the kids need to understand it. That dad isn't perfect, and so they don't have to be perfect. I think that they need to, at least for me, I think they need to understand that they're valued by God, that they're not an accident, that the creator of the universe looks at them and calls them glorious.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that for me, growing up without a dad, one of the particular questions I had is what's wrong with me that somebody would abandon me? Why wouldn't they want to be with us? And so as a father, hopefully I'm not overcorrecting. I want my kids to know they're valued. I think they need to understand that they're, as much as possible, that I'm going to do everything that I can to take care of them. But then I also want them, as a parent, it's like parental philosophy, give them freedom to be different from me.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, especially for me, when you grew up without a dad, you can sometimes want to relive your childhood through your kids and have them do all the things that you didn't get to do. But to give my children freedom to be different from me. So I was a football player in high school, and none of my kids are like football players, and that's fine. One of my sons is a soccer player. My other son, he plays some sports, but he's not, he's more into like other things. And so it's giving them the freedom to be able to do other things. Yeah, my older son is like track, and I'm as slow as dirt. And so allowing them to be themselves is what I try to do, and try to celebrate them as them, and more focus on, like I said earlier, values. So I think that there's certain things that are important for them as human beings and persons, but that those values are expressed through their personalities and their interests.
It's wonderful.
But I'm not the one who's a professional therapist. Is it therapist? I want to say a psychologist.
Yes,
what's the word?
Yes,
therapist.
Yeah.
Who can tell. So maybe y'all should be telling me what I need to do with my kids. This is the podcast. I came to get free therapy. I didn't realize I was supposed to be giving advice.
We loved your words.
Yes, we did.
And the wisdom behind them. And we've commented often that in all the years of doing this work, we have never seen parents as discouraged and as weary as this time in the world, and wondering, what would you want to say to weary parents right now?
Oh, man. I think that I wrote an article the other day where I said hope is most necessary when the evidence runs the other way.
Mm.
And so it's easy. And so maybe I want to explain what we're feeling and talk about this. When things are going well, it's actually not hope. It's just basking in glory. Like it's basking in the good economy and the stability of society. So you're actually not exercising hope. You're just living, right? And so it is precisely when things get bad that the hope meter is activated. So what's really interesting is when things are bad, we ask the question of what is it that gives us hope, when hope only works when things are bad. Like that's what hope is, right? And so part of being a parent or part of being a human is that the future is always foggy. And we can't control all outcomes. But if we can say, given what I know, these are the best things that I can do for my children, and I trust that these things will be good in the end, if you realize that that is what you're doing as a parent, it kind of frees us from controlling the outcome or changing the circumstances. One of the things that I talk about a lot is like the TV shows that I used to watch as a kid. I used to watch these procedural shows where like the person was in danger. This is like I used to watch reruns, so like the old Batman show from the 60s or like MacGyver or whatever.
West.
Yeah. And so the person would always be like, the bomb's going to go off in a minute and they're tied up, right? And you kind of go, how's they ever going to get out of this? And even though you know they're going to get out of it, you had to like write yourself into that corner. So come back next week so you can find out how he gets out of it. And so the things that I like about those shows is that they did a good job of actually setting a real problem for the protagonist. And I think that sometimes we want to say that things aren't so bad, so there's less to be afraid of. So we kind of lower the stakes of the problem and think about lowering the stakes of the problem, the solution manifests itself. And I want to go, no, like your assessment of society is not wrong. Things are bad. And this is exactly as hard as we are. We're Adam West. We are tied up and the bomb is ticking, right?
Yes.
But I do believe, maybe I'm a Christian, so I kind of say, well, that's fine, right? That I believe in a God who can rescue us. I believe that there's going to be a way forward. And there have been tons of times in the history of American society when there was no way forward. And we stuck to our values and things emerged better on the other end. One of the stories that I'd like to tell, I think it's the Dred Scott decision, 1855. I think that's the year, where the Supreme Court of the United States said that there is no law in the United States that applies to an African-American that society must actually adhere to. In other words, the abolitionist movement that have been resisting slavery for generations failed. The highest court in the land says you lose. Slavery is going to be here forever. And within a decade of Dred Scott, slavery was over. And so what do you do if you're an abolitionist in 1855 and you hear this law? And there's literally nothing like the Supreme Court. What could go higher than the Supreme Court? We've lost. And you know what the abolitionists did? They were sad. I mean, you know, you can read their responses and those things, but they knew that their cause was just. And so they continued forward with this bare conviction of, I know what I'm saying is good and true, and that hopefully something's going to emerge on the other end. And as a parent, that may seem like a long way to go to that analogy is, if society is unchangeable, then the best that you can do for your children is to give them the principles and the tools to survive and thrive in that society. If you can't change the world, prepare your children for the world that they're going to enter. Mm-hmm. And the world changes and turns on its axis way more often than we might expect. And there's so many ways that you can just think back over the last 10 years, and think about all the dramatic changes that have happened in America that no one saw coming before they did. And so I would say we do not know what is going to come around the corner for our children, but we can give them the principles and the values that allows them to survive regardless of what it is.
Amen
Man.
and amen.
Yes, that is so good. Thank you so much. I wish we could talk for 4 more hours with you, or we're going to need to find another event where we can come to all together. But thank you.
My scheduler said, though, that like if I come on the podcast, I get 5 free therapy sessions. We're just we're just going to run those later.
Yes.
We'll schedule those after the podcast over. But I was told that. I don't know. I don't know.
Indeed.
I don't know if your producer normally does that, but it's the deal that I got. I just want to cash those in.
Anytime. That is a great
deal. Those won't be recorded. Those won't be recorded. No. So y'all listeners won't get to hear those sessions, but maybe you could help me after this.
Oh gosh, Esau. Okay, so for all the people now anyone who didn't know you and has fallen in love with everything you're doing and saying, where can folks find you?
You can find me on the social media diaspora. So I think on Twitter and on is it Blue Sky and on Instagram and on Facebook, it's all the same. It's one of the great things of having a odd name, at Esau McCaulley. So if you put at Esau McCaulley, you can find me on Instagram and on like Twitter and all of those things. And also you can go to EsauMcCaulley.com and find access to all of my books and other things like that. And if you type it into if you go to wherever you buy bookstores, you can find my books there.
And we strongly recommend folks do.
Yes,
strongly recommend. And Esau, we end every conversation with something fun and food related. We move from the substantive to the silly. So we've got a 2-part question for you.
Okay.
Part 1 is queso or guac, and part 2 is what's your favorite taco?
So in my heart, it is queso. But because I'm lactose intolerant, my mind says I should go with the guac. So it is guacamole. And my favorite taco, I mean, I'm not a taco person, but I would say if I want to go to a Mexican restaurant, a good chimichanga is just like, chimichanga with guacamole on top. It's just like, that's heaven.
Indeed it is.
Yeah, it is.
Are y'all making good tacos in Nashville now? Have y'all improved your taco game?
We have a little.
We really have.
Yes.
Okay.
Not as good as Texas, but we're working on it.
You know, I went to school in Swanee, which is about a couple of hours from where you all are. So I know a little bit about Tennessee.
We love the University of the South.
We do.
Well, we hope you find your way back to Tennessee at some point in the near future, and we'd love to share a meal with you. You are a wonder in this world.
Yes,
We're
you
so
are.
honored to get to share time with you
today.
Thank you.
I had a great time. Thank you for having me.
Us too. David, what a team we have that we get to call friends who help make this podcast possible.
Amanda Young, our operations manager.
Chris Starrett, our engineer.
Our management team at H Squared.
And we are thrilled to be a part of the That Sounds Fun network.
Our music was created by the insanely talented Dave Haywood of Lady A.
And if this podcast felt helpful to you, please consider subscribing, liking, sharing, all the things.
We are grateful for you and cheering you on always.